Hello, I'm Bailey. I'm here to talk about something near and dear to my heart, my husband's safety. One of the most common questions that I get outside of the racetrack is whether I think my husband is safe, whether I'm concerned about a car wreck, whether I've seen some really bad stuff at the track too. All those questions I didn't really know the answer to at first when we started racing, but I felt more of a responsibility to figure that out since I am a fourth-year medical student and former bioengineer. I wanted to see what kind of safety mechanisms there are in the car, how at risk my husband is, and what those risks are so we can figure out how to manage them if we need to. So this is a little video on the structural mechanisms of safety built into the car and also some of the driver safety equipment that he wears going to the racetrack every day. So I wanted to talk about what the equipment that we are going to go through is really designed for and the injuries that I'm concerned about for whenever Jayski gets in the car. Those being these three buckets, so head and neck injuries, injuries from heat, and injuries to the extremities or the hands and feet. Historically, some of the head and neck injuries that we've seen on race car drivers includes some really serious things. Basilar skull fractures are any kind of fracture at the bottom of the skull. And, your skull protects some pretty vital things to the functioning of the human body. So there are a lot of nervous system components, nerves, blood vessels, and compartments that you have to worry about here that could get injured in a basilar skull fracture. Then moving on to flexion extension injuries, you can have some really high cervical fractures that result from this, hyperextension and hyperflexion injury. And then there's a lot of nerves, vessels in this area as well that are life supporting, and that can be also very dangerous. And then let's talk about a little bit the thing that has just garnered a lot of national media attention recently is going to be concussions. So your brain is still at risk within the skull itself of being injured. And any time that you have a deceleration from a very high speed to a standstill, you're going to experience some injury to the brain as well as it hits the front of the skull and then goes back. You can also have direct impact injuries, of course, to the skull, but mainly I think the concussions stem from this kind of injury. And then moving next to heat injuries, I think heat exhaustion is really underestimated. And, a lot of these races can be very long, not as long as NASCAR, but you can still build up a lot of heat within the car, and the driver is wearing, flame resistant material from head to toe that can be very thick. The reason why I'm so concerned about this is because heat exhaustion can lead to heat stroke, and I don't believe that these symptoms, if you told a race car driver to pull off of the track with these symptoms, that they would really believe that that would be a necessary thing that they could finish the race. But if it is going to progress, then it will progress to heat stroke, which is by definition a much more dangerous state where you have more severe symptoms like confusion, dizziness, and potentially unconsciousness. This is an emergency. Call 911 if this happens. Dunk a person in ice water or do whatever you can to cool them down, and make sure that you have an ambulance on the way because it can lead to death if untreated. But just thinking about, a race car driver not pulling off and developing this just makes me really worried. So I can be the heat police at the track pretty often, me and Jacob's mom together. And then, of course, there's fuel in the race car that can catch fire and lead to burns. There's a lot of flame-resistant gear that he wears, and if it's bad enough, then it could require care at like a burn treatment center. So a little bit more elevated than just going to the hospital. And then our injuries to the extremities, the most common ones being wrist fractures. So that can look like, some of these little bones within the wrist, carpal bones, like a scaphoid fracture and a distal radius fracture. These are the most common ones from hitting the steering wheel. But you can also have other fractures of the feet, absolutely, with the feet resting on the floorboard and contacting all the different controls of the car below. So how do these injuries compare in the past to the present? There's been a lot of innovation from the 80s, and so I got some information on just how prevalent those things are compared to how prevalent they were in the past. And I want to start out with concussions because I think, the information here can be a little bit surprising to me, but when I think about it, not so much. So in the past, in studies comparing injuries from the 80s to now, concussions were said to occur about 2 to 5% of the time when it came to injuries requiring hospital care. And now that number is 12.5%. For me, I'm a little bit critical of this estimation because I think concussions are probably much more prevalent due to just us knowing more about concussions and knowing what they look like. So while I do think it's interesting to see that, I'm not sure that is necessarily more incidents of concussions exactly. But some of the more cool estimations that just denote kind of the effect of these innovations. So in the past, before the 80s, 16 to 34% of injuries requiring hospital care were neck injuries, and then now that number is actually also 12.5%. So that has gone down, and that's a big window, 16 to 34%, just depending on the study that you read. But at least the overall trend is down, and I do believe that is probably due to the Hans device. Now for extremity injuries, definitely denoting a good portion of those injuries requiring hospital care in the past, it has actually gone down to less than half of what it initially was. I do think one really cool thing to mention is the role of history in the development of all these safety innovations as well. You can't read about these safety innovations without reading about Dale Earnhardt and the direct or indirect effect that he had on the development of these different pieces of equipment, the protocols, and initiatives for safety from NASCAR, which has trickled down to stock car racing. So here's just a couple of examples of the things that he had a major impact on, or that his death really led to the widespread implementation or development of these things. All right, so here we got the helmet. Just a few things about the helmet that you might not know, even though it's pretty common to know more about this. Air intake on top helps circulate air for the driver on the inside. Visor really helps with reducing glare. And then you want to make sure that the helmet doesn't have any damage to it. If the shell is full, that helps it distribute force over the whole entire area. And then moving on to a much more important device, this device would have saved Dale Earnhardt's life back in the day, the head and neck support system. It sits on Jacob's shoulders here and then tethers into the helmet on the sides. And your body won't stop if the car stops. Basic law of physics. So whenever, if you have a front impact and the car immediately stops, jerking the head forward, this tether system is going to restrict the movement forward. All right, now moving into the inside of the car, connecting back to what you saw with the helmet. This is the hose leading to the helmet that'll help him circulate air through his helmet right here, and it just comes in through the back. The seat is so important also for protecting the driver. You can see this portion sitting here on top is the halo, and like the Hans device restricts the motion forward, you also have the restriction of motion from side to side and backwards. And then just to show you how compressed the space is with the helmet, so from side to side he really doesn't have that much space. If he moves to the left, it's only probably an inch or so, and he's got probably not much room on the back either. Can't really judge that for sure, but it really does restrict a lot of movement from side to side. And he uses his mirrors to see other cars, and we have a spotter telling him where other cars are on the track, so he doesn't have to look too far out of the way. So we talked about the halo. Let's talk about his bodily restraint system. So he uses a 5-point seatbelt right here. So he has 2 coming over the shoulders, and then 2 across the hips, and then 1 coming from underneath. All these attach in the center here, and that way if there is a fire or a wreck and he needs to make a quick exit, then he just pulls in one area in the middle and is able to release all 5, then get out of the car. So we have a 2-part steering column, 1 part, 2nd part. They can slide past each other in the case of a wreck. And a little bit hard to see down there. There's a rubber piece that also allows for compression of one of the parts. That way, the wheel doesn't move towards the driver in a wreck on the front end. This is an uncovered race car, and I want to show some of the design components of the chassis and roll cage and how that keeps the driver safe. The entire chassis is really built and designed to prevent any kind of intrusion of the driver's cabin and the rest of the car to crumple around it. And so the biggest way that it prevents this is all of these bars in the center here are going to be more stiff than the bars on the outside. And so whenever a driver gets in a wreck, what's going to happen is the energy that's created from the change in velocity is going to compress and dissipate through all of these other bars, hopefully collapsing, but the driver's cabin should remain intact as much as possible. The way that they accomplish this is, although the outer diameter of the tubes is the same, the inner diameter, this portion right here, is going to be much more narrow, and that lets the bars be thicker and more stiff. Alright, the next thing is that all of these, the placement of the bars, all have a purpose for the most part. Of course, this is maintaining the shape of the car and protecting the driver in like a roll instance, a roll cage. But this bar actually here in the middle is called the Earnhardt bar, and that is in place in the middle of the windshield in a vertical position because of a famous crash with Dale Earnhardt and several other drivers where the roof caved in during a rollover. And so now that prevents the roof from caving in as much. And you also have a higher collection, higher density of these bars across the driver's, the length of the driver's body, and a carbon fiber seat that's fitted to their body and surrounds the driver and kind of helps prevent any kind of bodily injury there. And then the other thing is all throughout the car and around the driver's cabin, there are these sheets of metal attaching the body and the roll cage that are put in place to dissipate energy during a crash. They are called crush panels because they're panels that crush. So that also helps to relieve some of the energy, dissipate energy, and collapse around the driver's cabin. And then while we're here, I just wanted to show that these are little firewalls that help prevent any kind of fire or flame from reaching the inside of the driver's cabin. And we'll see those on the car as well. We didn't go through all the safety features of a race car in this video. If we had, it probably would have taken double the amount of time. Instead, I hope I showed you some of the features of a race car that really help to protect the drivers in the car and showed you just how much they care about safety in the racing community. While Jacob isn't completely safe, he is a lot safer because of the things that they've done to improve racing. So that's it for me. Thank you.